Welcome, everybody, to a little thing called GameThinkTalk. This is a podcast about video games. Yes, there are a million of them. I'm your host, Matthew Fava. I'm joined by...
Yo, Matthew Owen, that's me. I'm the guy. What's up, Matt Fava?
The guy? What, are we going to have a competition here for who is the most guyish?
There's only room enough for one of us in this podcast. This podcast is mine.
Look, you stay up there in your building, and I'll stay down here in the street. I'm the man on the street talking to all the Japanese people.
If only I could reach you.
You're trying, but it's virtual, and nothing can harm me in the virtual landscape. Who do we got there? We got Crazy Cause is in the chat.
What's up, dude?
Crazy Cause is there. Can everybody hear Matt? We've often started this thing before and not had your audio.
And then I talk for like 20 minutes, and then just people can't hear me.
This time I think it's gonna work.
We're good, huh?
Turn down the idle of time and space. I was toying with the idea of adding ambient noise to the back. I thought it would be cool to have like fire, and just fire crackling or rain, maybe. But
maybe for like a holiday episode when it feels more homely.
Yes. Well, you're covering the homely part of it. So let's talk about two games. Homely. Hey. Audio is good, says Crazy Cause. Let's go with Rad Rogers and Immortal Redneck. Which one do you feel like talking about first?
Let's do Rad Rogers.
Great.
Do Rad Rogers
Great.
for sure.
Above Matt's head, you'll see a World 1 available now launch trailer being played. Look, they're putting it in the Super Nintendo. It's cool. Made by 3D Realms. What the heck?
Yeah, 3D Realms. They're responsible for games such as Duke Nukem 3D and Commander Keen.
Yeah,
if you remember far back then. But that might be a little old school for some people.
But it's a platformer, and Commander Keen's
action platformer. Yeah. So back in the day, before we had Mario, more of the PC side-scrolling adventures, instead of being more platforming-centric, they were action-centric. Commander Keen, you have a gun, you're shooting enemies, collecting collectibles. Rad Rogers is that, but for a modern era. So you play as Rad Rogers, and he has like this little backpack.
Rad.
Exactly. It's like a fun little kid character. There's not a whole lot going on in the story. It's basically like he's playing a game, and then his mom tells him to turn it off, and then he goes to turn it off, and he gets sucked into the game. Very, very cliche kind of 80s story. But what's interesting about this game, before you even start it, is it asks who's playing. Is an adult playing, or is a child playing?
Oh, that's interesting, because I watched the trailer, and there's some really questionable jokes in terms of, I wouldn't want a kid to see this.
Exactly. So much like if you remember the game Brutal Legend for Xbox 360, a Jack Black rock game, other games have done this before, but Rad Rogers allows you to censor content depending on who's playing. So if you want, you can remove all language, so no F-bombs or no swearing, and you can remove gore as well. So if you have a kid who's playing, essentially this game is a 2D platformer. You run around with a gun, you can shoot colorful enemies, collect these green gems, and, avoid obstacles and just enjoy the pretty landscape.
Kind of looks like Earthworm Jim.
Yeah, it's one of those early, 2.5D action platformers. The point is that it's more about shooting the guys and, defeating enemies than it is about making awesome jumps.
So like a Mega Man?
Kind of, yeah, but it's a little bit more relaxed. I've only made it through about 4 to 5 levels of it. What's interesting is that this game was a Kickstarter game, and it was originally on PC. On the console release, they're doing this. It might be the same for the PC, but I'm not 100% sure. But they're doing what's called this Rad Rogers World 1, with the expectation of World 2 and then World 3 to be coming for an additional nominal price, because the game is only $20, right? Or World 1.
World 1 is $20?
Yeah.
Seems a bit high. How many hours is that?
Like I said, I've only played 4 to 5 levels of it, judging by...
Of World 1?
Because they kind of... Yes.
Oh, okay. I see. When you said that, I kind of...
The game,
yeah.
That's what's weird, is because you're like... Without beating the game, I'm not sure if World 1 refers to literally only one world, because you get this kind of overworld Mario map, where you're moving from level to level, completing it, and moving on.
Yeah.
And, there's 3 sections to this one map. But having not completed that map, I don't know if it's the only world. I would assume that it's just one world per game. I don't know exactly how they're going to do it money-wise, but the point is that this is, a part of a continuing series. but World 1, it's fun. You know, it's not exactly what I was hoping for. Maybe because I'm used to how quick and how open Commander Keen was.
Yeah.
You know, if you play Commander Keen, there's very labyrinthian levels. There's so many places to go, lots of collectibles. Rad Rogers kind of just, it's about shooting the guys, collecting these green gems, and kind of the humor that gets tied into it when you're playing with the adult settings on. So for a kid, this is a pretty decent platforming game. It's not too hard, but it's not too easy. So there's a good level of challenge to keep them interested. As an adult, you might be a little bit so-so on the gameplay. Like I said, it's a little bit bare bones, a little basic, but this is only coming off of playing 5 or so levels. But what gives the game its personality is the swearing. You know, it's juxtaposed by this kind of cutesy, cartoony visuals, but then you have enemies making, like you said, some questionable jokes, swearing at you, you're shooting them, their heads are popping off, etc. That's kind of where you get the twist to the personality. It's fun. It's definitely fun. On the Xbox One, it can run a little, like, it runs okay. It's not chugging or anything, but it's not at 60 FPS. You're not pulling away with like that perfect experience that you would get on a PC, but it's serviceable. It's just interesting to me that 3D Realms is making this kind of Commander Keen style game in this modern age, and the fact that it was successful as a Kickstarter game too. Yeah, I thought that maybe those kind of action-oriented side scrollers would more be for the indie market. Like the 16-bit pixel art kind of thing. That's where I imagine these sitting. But you know, this is fully rendered 3D graphics, so it's looks more modern than the game genre that it's trying to emulate. So the gameplay feels a little bit hollow at points, but the game looks quite good. I guess it just matters how much you like, you know, dirty jokes with your action adventure game. I'm having a good time, but it's one of those things, like it's one note. You know, I haven't gotten to a point where I get some huge power up or something crazy, so I might be speaking out of turn. But at this point, you know, 4 or 5 levels in, it's fun. I don't feel like a rushing need to get back into it. The first night I played those levels, and then I was kind of done with it, and I haven't really returned. It's been like a week or so, but it's fun. So it depends really on what your preferences are when it comes to side-scrolling and action-adventure games. If you want something a little bit more retro, this might be right up your alley. But then again, something like, I don't know, Binding of Isaac might be very different. But I'm trying to think of something that's more... Maybe Flint Hook is a game that might be more up your alley. I think this game is pretty, but suffers from those hollow gameplay experiences.
It looks
I think
like
someone like you or me, Matt, would enjoy it more because we like things like Commander Keen. We know where it comes from. Comparing Rad Rogers to modern-day side-scrolling action-adventure games, it's kind of in the middle there. It feels like a budget title.
It looks like it should be an arcade game.
Yeah. And that's
like something
that's
you'd want to put in 25 cents, play for an hour, and then never really think again about.
Well, that's kind of how, depending on how you play, that's kind of how I play Mario. You know, I play Mario, I play 10 levels, maybe play a world, then I'm done, I go back. That's kind of how this game is, but I just didn't feel, you know, I might play a whole world of Mario 3 because it's that fun.
Yeah.
Rad Rogers, I play 5 levels straight, get a hold of the game, kind of figure out what's got going on, enjoyed it, but didn't feel the rush to go back. So I would say currently, without me having finished it, maybe we can return to this game after I've finished it or had more time with it. I would say it's a tentative buy, but once again, it depends. If you have a kid who wants to get into more action-based games, but, you know, they don't know too much about gaming, maybe they don't have the skills to do some crazy movement that might be expected from some of these other indie games, it's decent. Because, you know, all you're really doing is jumping, shooting, and trying to get to the end of the level. It's not much more than that.
I mean, visually, it looks like there's a lot going on. It's got a lot of nice depth to it, a lot of nice scale. I see the shooting. The shooting reminds me a lot of Metal Slug, and maybe the jumping and leaping around looks like Earthworm Jim. But where... I'm
trying to remember if you can... I think you can lock your gun and kind of shoot in all directions, kind of Metroid Samus Return style. I could be misremembering it, but I'm pretty sure that you can do that too. So there is some functioning, and I don't think you can just shoot in cardinal directions. I think you can shoot all over the place, but I might be talking out of turn there.
So there's just not enough... There's not enough, say, weapon variety, gameplay variety. I mean, visually, there's a lot of variety, but there just isn't... they're not asking you to do enough differently to warrant you to keep playing. They're not sort of introducing those new abilities or new challenges They're not making you think any differently. It's just more of like a mindless. This probably would have made a really good co-op game.
Yeah, I that too. Once again, it could be just I stopped the level before they were going to introduce something new. It could be that because I am early on in the game, but just judging from those first introductory levels, after they teach you kind of how the game plays and let you loose, they don't really expect too much from you. It's just kind of, like you said, a relaxing, somewhat relaxing action adventure platformer, more focused on the action than the actual platforming. But that might change as we move on. The overworld map kind of indicates different sections, almost like different sub areas of the map. So moving into those subsections, they might have some gameplay elements that are different, but I just haven't reached those yet. I would say to expect a grandiose, crazy, polished, side-scrolling action adventure game from this would be expecting too much. If you limit your expectations, understand that you're going in on something that feels, kind of like a budget title, but looks pretty, you'll be pleasantly surprised. And like I said earlier, if you have nostalgia for old school PC-based side-scrolling games like Jazz the Jackrabbit or Commander Keen, that's what this emulates the most. So I draw some nostalgia from that. I'm also a huge 3D Realms fan. So your mileage may vary, but all told, it is a very, very functional and serviceable action-adventure platformer. So if that's something you're interested in, check it out. For those who might want something a little bit more depth to the game, I haven't gotten far enough to tell you whether or not that exists, but I would say right now it's a little bit more bare bones. Yeah, for sure.
Do you know if the other worlds are released yet, or is this just the first world that's out that you can buy, and then they're going to keep releasing that? Because I'm wondering if they're holding back some of the other mechanics. Maybe we'll see some other things. They're like, well, we'll front load the part that we have down really solid, and then maybe they'll introduce some other things. There's a bit in this, like, have you gotten to the part where you're in that underwater ship?
No.
Grab onto things?
All the stuff I've done pretty much so far could be compared to like a level or World 1 Mario stuff. Kind of jumping through these forested environments, very pretty looking environments, shooting enemies. Nothing really besides that. Don't worry about spoiling anything for me. Like that, knowing that there might be another section like that adds some credence to the game. Shows that there's some depth. I just haven't reached it yet.
Yeah, I don't think at a platform you think about spoilers. It's more like you're actually excited to get to those points. It's
exactly. And I think I did just that. I think I played the intro and then I played the first subsection of the world, and I got right to that point where you're about to move into something new, and then I turned it off. So I might have been right on the cusp of that.
Do you find it funny?
Hit and miss. And the reason, so I'll bring this up again with Immortal Redneck, is that it feels, you know how there's like 80s one-liners that action stars say? Yeah. And then there's like cheesy 90s one-liners. They're kind of like in there. They're not self-referencing the 90s. It's not like full of pop culture, but it's kind of those hit and miss. I guess it depends on how giggly you're feeling, you know? Kids might find it funny just because, their characters a lot of heart and a lot of personality, but most of the jokes are kind of, it's like some fart joke. Not a fart joke, but they're not more complex than that.
But they're trading on mostly nostalgia, right? So they're catering towards this nostalgic audience that's old, but then they have a lot of fart jokes and childish things for kids that don't know this era at all.
That's where it's kind of like a mixed bag, because if you're playing it as an adult, the gameplay might not be as deep as you want, and like I said, the mature comedy isn't really all that mature. It's just more or less dirty, and it's dirty in a weird way. The world doesn't really incite these kind of...
The grandmother tree, they say in the trailer, they say she's smoking a wooden pipe, and they make some reference. She's like, "This is my ex-husband," and I don't know how deep they were or how dirty they were getting with that joke.
There's a weed joke in there.
I don't know if it was weed or if it was more like, "This is my husband," and she's smoking it.
Oh, okay. I mean, well, that's probably the deepest joke that I've heard from it. If that's. If you find that funny, there you go. I just wouldn't expect like them to stop and like give you like deadpan awesome comedy. This game is more about being jovial, and it's jovial when you're playing on the kids mode, and then they turn that jovialness into kind of some perverted, not in a sexual way, but they perverse the idea of comedy to a more mature way.
And you're saying it's not very challenging? It's more of a walk in the park?
No, at least the point I've made. And also, it's important to note that my co-host on my podcast, Super Gamecast 64, Kevin, He kickstarted this game, and he was also a big fan of games like Jazz Jackrabbit, and he was a bit disappointed too. So I think this game lives up to some expectations, but fails some, and that's just kind of what you get from these Kickstarter games. To your question earlier, I think the PC is a little bit further along in development. I think they have Worlds 2. They might be about to release World 2. Okay. But on the consoles, if you type in Rad Rogers, all you're going to get is Rad Rogers World 1. And they haven't said whether or not World 2 will be a DLC or a brand new game. How they want to release it, I don't know. I haven't researched it. Kevin might know a little bit more about that. But as of right now, I think it's just the World 1 is out on all the consoles, and they're working on Worlds 2 and 3. They have enough support to get out there.
So a tepid recommendation?
Yeah, depending on if you're a fan of platformers, if you're a fan of 2D action games, give it a look. I would say look at the trailer, see if it looks interesting to you. If you have a PC, you might want to play it on that over a console just for visuals, because like Matt said, the visuals are kind of what stands out about the whole thing. And
yeah, it looks really, really nice. Good lighting.
PC, you're going to get
depth.
that 60 FPS.
Yeah.
Like Matt said, yeah, you'll get that depth of field. But on console, you're looking at 30 FPS kind of locked. So yeah, tepid recommendation. If you're looking for the next Super Mario Brothers, look somewhere else, because that's not this. But if you liked, like I said, Commander Keen, some of the older, I'm trying to think, Commando, Captain Comic, what was that?
What?
Platformers that have shooting in it. There was another old school floppy disk game I was trying to think of.
I don't know. Only know that
Captain
I know
Comic.
Captain Comic, eh?
Maybe it was
Comic Zone. Oh.
No, Comic Zone was like Genesis and stuff.
There was Crystal Caves was an Apogee one, and it was a platforming sort of 2D popping up and down. It was just like Duke Nukem. Anyways, all right, there you go.
Doesn't matter. I'm slowly reaching over to my floppy disk collection.
Fine. Well, before did you want to talk about Immortal Redneck, or should I talk a little bit about a game called Metal Gear Solid?
Oh, yeah, you know what? Let's get some Metal Gear Solid in there, because I think Immortal Redneck might have some similar discussion points. So I want to get some of that serious, good espionage.
Right. So, a bit
on
the channel, we played through Metal Gear Solid 2, and then we did Metal Gear Solid 3, and then we went back and did Metal Gear Solid 1. You can get an integral version on the PC, and it is it's pretty great. It actually runs in 720.
For Metal Gear Solid 1?
Metal Gear Solid 1.
Version?
Yeah.
Does it have that first-person mode?
It does have the first-person mode.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I like that. That was in the GameCube Twin Snakes version.
Crazy Cause says Captain Comic was great. No, so this isn't the Twin Snakes version. This is the actual original PlayStation version, but ported to the PC. And you can download this thing for free. People have made it available and fixed it and made it run on modern computers. I had no problem running it at all. I just got it works well with the bordered windowless gaming. It was great. And yeah, the only issue I had is that when you reload a game, sometimes you have to remap the button controls. But I mean, that's not that big of a problem. Anyways, going back to Metal Gear Solid 1, I was wondering if comparing it to 2 and 3, if maybe it was just nostalgia that had me longing to play the first one and still preferring it in my memory, because
one and two are the closest to. I think 3 is kind of the outlier. 3 is the stuff that really gets into the camouflage and all that stuff.
Yeah.
When you look at them, 1 and 2 are close.
3 was a lot more. They added a bit more realism, where it was the camouflage. They did away with the radar. You had a motion detector, but it had to do, like a sonar. It had to ping around, and it used up battery. Everything used up battery or used up stamina, and you were constantly moving. So it was, it was that era where they wanted more realism in games. When we saw GTA San Andreas, that kind of thing. And then 2 was a lot like 1, but added a few more quality of life controls. You could dive when you were running. You could hang from ledges. You could aim in first person mode and that kind of thing.
Tactile Snake.
Very much so. It was very tactical. They put the tactical espionage action. But going back to 1, the first half of the game, I thought, oh no, this is still my favorite. I love the dialogue. It strikes a nice balance between being very serious, being a little bit campy, and then adding some of the paranoia, conspiracy theory stuff. But that first half, when you fight Sniper Wolf, you fight Psycho Mantis, the first tank battle, Revolver Ocelot, it's so good. I think it's my favorite moments of the entire franchise. What I found, though, is after
That's where I drop off too. Right after the tank battle, almost Psycho Mantis is where I'm like, that's the pinnacle.
That's it. Well, and the Sniper Wolf battle is fantastic too.
Yeah, well, but the Sniper Wolf comes
right after Psycho Mantis.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I think it's the tank where I fall off usually.
But also with Sniper Wolf, it introduces the first bit of backtracking, which is not so bad. But then you do the Sniper Wolf, you do the torture scene, you have to escape from jail. All that's great. I mean, there's so many...
The catch-up.
Yeah, but there's other ways you can get around that too, which is really nice. And it's that's super inventive. I just find that once they start involving a lot of these double crosses, and I won't spoil anything, but there are probably one or two too many. It seems like all of a sudden 3 or 4 people are revealed to have double-crossed Snake or triple-crossed, and it kind of kills the impact of some of the other ones. And after we finished, we're talking about it, and I thought, all right, let's just look at this story as if one of the characters didn't do a double cross. And if you removed that whole element of it, it wouldn't actually affect the overall story, and all it would do is would just strengthen the other elements. So I think that he went a little too Kojima, and the things that you can criticize about Metal Gear Solid,
I was just going to say that.
Where it kind of kills the momentum. I was actually pretty surprised with how well the pacing was done with the amount of story and the action. It does start bogging down right around when you go to Psycho Mantis, where instead of it being these long areas, the best part of Metal Gear Solid is that you start off in that open area, you learn how to deal with 2 guards, you ride the elevator up, then you're outside, and that's a bit of a sandbox area. You see the Hind E, and then there's 2 different ways you can infiltrate into that building. Then you have the warehouse storage, and that's a whole sandbox area too. And then there's another one, and then after that is where I find it gets a little bit too backtracky, a little bit too story heavy. But then it makes up for it with a really strong ending. And even at its worst moments, it's still super enjoyable. I just think that first half is so good, best part of the franchise, but the pacing, momentum, and sort of the too Kojima-esque part drags it down where it just can't compete anymore with how solid 2 and 3 are. So
I think that's what you said was perfect. When you look at Metal Gear Solid, it's Kojima's first effort into that kind of, new franchise. Coming at it, already playing 2 and 3 most recently, you're used to Kojima and the Metal Gear story being bonkers, right? It's already gotten crazy. By the time you get to 3 and 2, there's, like you said, so many double crosses. You need to know so many different people. But like you said, the first half of Metal Gear Solid 1, you can keep up with the story very well. It's almost like this kind of more dirty James Bond film. You can understand all the paranoia, and it's like once they get to the end where Kojima puts in all of the stuff that he had in his head, that you start to see what Metal Gear Solid 1 is almost like a good allegory for the whole entire series. Just the further you get, the progressively less sense it makes, but the more action comes out. It started to be more of an action series towards the latter half of the series. But in the beginning, it was a very, very detailed espionage story with a lot of stuff going on. But eventually those threads just go all over the place. I think that's one of the reasons I like Metal Gear Solid 1 so much in comparison to the other ones. Maybe 2 a little bit as well for the same reasons. But Metal Gear 1, they're not so far into the story where you have all these questions that are constantly in your head, like nanomachines and is this big boss and who's doing. It's an easy story to understand, and it's good to get these base carings for the characters. You can look at Solid Snake and understand him, and talking to Meryl, you always remember Meryl because she's it's just that's your contact. It's a really fun beginning to the game. It's just, like you said, a little bit of a shame that it slogs down narratively towards the end, but it wouldn't be a Kojima game without that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it becomes the guilty pleasure of it. Where 2, I thought, was very, very concise. It got in, it got out very quickly. It's a big sandbox to play in. There's a lot of things to go back and play around with, shaking down the dog tags. The story, I was with the story all the way up until the end when all of a sudden, again, it's double, triple crosses from 3 people. And in the end, you're like, who even wants to do anything anymore? All the motivations have just been like put into a box and like shaken up and then dumped out into a table, and you're like, I don't care about these characters anymore, because it's just like nothing really matters. But 2 is trying to, 2 is a really bold move. I've never seen a video game like 2 other than maybe Nier Automata. I'm only on Route B of it, but where a creator is kind of challenging the player so much and doing it pretty well. Whereas 3 is more like, oh, you guys liked 1, let's just have fun again. Everything's fun. 3, the story held up absolutely perfectly and still managed to have a double, triple cross, but it totally made sense. So I think in the end, 3 is the best.
It makes sense for 3 having all of those double, triple crosses and all of that kind of infighting and the in politics makes sense for the story they're trying to tell.
Yeah.
I think 2, you don't have as much of all of that, for lack of a better word, confusion, because 2 was already a big Kojima move by, for those who don't know, Metal Gear Solid 2, they led everyone to believe that you're going to be playing as Solid Snake again. You know, that's what Metal Gear Solid 2 is, Sons of Liberty, playing as Solid Snake. And the game came out, and you play as Solid Snake in the beginning, and then, boom, you're right onto this Raiden character, or Raiden, or whatever. And that was the big wool over everybody's eyes. So I don't think Kojima needed to bog down the story with any of his other stuff, because he had already effectively, like you said, challenged the whole audience by changing the main character halfway through. That was his big move for that one. It's not until he tries to wrap up the story where he goes back to his old, okay, we'll just have this person double cross this. By the end, you have no clue what anybody's motivations were in the first place. But
and he already has a hard enough time because he's really obsessed with retconning everything together, and he's trying to flesh out and tie in stories from 8-bit games that were put out on the Japanese 8-bit home computer, Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, where there really wasn't too much story. Metal Gear 1 is about Snake going to a place, and he finds out that what is it? I don't even know. I don't know which one has where Big Boss your boss is the villain in the end of it, is what Metal Gear 1 is.
I think that Metal Gear is a perfect example of, oftentimes it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right? It's Metal Gear is about seeing these characters grow and watching Snake go through these relationships and watching these different characters, how they interact. At the end of it, the politics, for how much they play into it, are merely a suggestion. You know, there's so much to the politics in the background and where everything takes place and how it ties into the overarch of the franchise. But each Metal Gear game is really about the journey. You know, when you think about Metal Gear 1, you don't remember the climax. You remember Psycho Mantis, talking about what's on your memory card. You remember, like you said, the first time you had to backtrack through Sniper Wolf. You remember that, smoking the cigarette. You remember these small parts along the journey, not the story on a whole. At least that's how I remember it.
Sure.
And I think that Metal Gear kind of lends itself to that. I think Kojima, for all of his big picture ideas and how crazy they can get, I think Kojima is one of the best people at making really engaging small parts, subplots to a story, or even just sections,
and gameplay details. There's so many lines in it where that is going to come into play later, and there's so many ways he just, we're in this really ubiquitous time of gaming where everything is a third-person survival cover shooter.
Metal Gear Survive.
Even Metal Gear Solid has become what every game is now, and everything has slight RPG elements. So it's so interesting to go back and see these mechanics that were so, with this in the PS2 era, especially in PS1, they were very unique because everybody was almost
a non-crossed genre.
Yeah,
it's stealth and some not even third-person action. It's a stealth game.
And he was creating a lot of new gameplay mechanics just to introduce a few new things, and he was always forging his own way and just putting so much effort and so much detail into it and creating these moments. By making it an 8-hour game, he could get in there and craft it. It was like artisanal, and there were so many more interesting things you could do, whereas a lot of modern games now have to, like I'm playing Prey. Prey does not need to be this long. I was so into Prey for the first 10, 15 or something, and I just got to a point where I'm thinking, this needs, the main narrative needs to pick up. But they're just like, oh no, we're modern game time. This is 2017, 2018. This game needs to be 30 to 40 hours long. Like, I really don't think this game holds up that long.
Can I give you a wee bit of advice as far as Prey? Just really enjoy the amount of Deus Ex level control they give you.
Yeah.
And don't really invest yourself in the story, because I will tell you, it kind of gets cliche towards the end, and Prey is more about the atmosphere. It's about that paranoia and that kind of place they were able to make, and the story goes to some places, but ultimately I think you'd be a bit disappointed with the ways they go. And also you have different endings depending on if you choose certain power-ups and corrupt your character, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, look, with Dishonored 2, I loved it because even though the main narrative was super weak, it was all about it was so much more episodic, where one level in Dishonored 2 would just be this mansion, and the end goal is to go assassinate this character, and you learn
Prey is just so open.
you learn everything about this character that you're trying to assassinate on the way in, whether it's from the architecture, the layout, the staff that is working for him, the guests, the enemies, everything, and then you get to it, and then you confront them, you kill them, and then you kind of move on to something else. And I think Prey would have worked probably better in more of that episodic fashion, whereas I'm still loving exploring everything, but I'm kind of hitting a point where the main narrative or some kind of narrative needs to pick it up and push it along, but it's getting to the same part where it's like, okay, well, now here's 17 more rooms, explore them, and you're going to get a lot of fun micro stories, but there isn't that overall push, which while I loved the game, it was like 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 for me for that first half. It's now hitting a sag where I can see it dropping down a bit more.
Now you see why I gave that 7. It's one of those things that overstays its welcome, and I think a game like Deus Ex, in comparison to Prey, because they're similar in how they let you play, I think Deus Ex does it better because it has all these characters, it has all these sub-stories, whereas Prey is generally an abandoned base. So like you said, it's an abandoned space station. There's still people around, but the majority of it is exploring these rooms and maybe finding a mimic or two. And it feels a little bit more, not claustrophobic. It just feels empty, but that's kind of how they envision it to be. So
and also that like the thrill and the suspense, and they do a great job in the first half where you're really terrified of these enemies. And when a mimic pops out, I mean, that's a big thing to deal with. And then the larger ones are so much more to deal with. Now I'm at a point, once you get this phantom shift and a shotgun, I even easily killed the nightmare, which before was a huge terrifying thing.
Yeah.
It's hunting you, and it was scaring me. And now it's more like they've all become an annoyance. So now that the threat of the aliens has dissipated, it's still solid, but it's not like I was high on this game for the first half. And now I'm thinking, all right, I think I'm kind of ready for it to be over.
I was lucky enough to, and I mean, I'll just admit this.
Tell us all.
Around that same time that you got bored, right? Maybe was it like 20 hours in? You said 15-ish hours in?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So when the game first came out, not only was it broken, there was a whole issue with it being broken and, game-breaking stuff. So I didn't feel bad. There was a glitch that you just replicate all your crafting materials. And then you could be
because they're very, very scarce in the beginning.
So I played that first, and you get that suspense and that scary horror thing. And then as it, like you said, starts to get towards this more open thing, explore more things. The game was broken as was. And I was like, I'm not having that much fun, but I need to beat this. So yeah, I'm going to glitch and, multiply all my stuff.
Which is not the way to play that game. It's just, it ruins the pacing of it. It's a game. No. I constantly think I would have not wanted to review this game because it's too... It's you get so much more out of it by going through it incredibly slowly. You need to be like a chimpanzee on your other chimpanzee's friend back, just picking through the hairs, looking for lice, eating the lice.
But even to that point, even when I had, because multiplying your resources does you a lot of benefit as far as ammo and stuff like that, but it still didn't get rid of the getting lost in some sections. There is, I think it was a hangar bay or something, because as cool as you can go outside of the space station and Prey, and you're in like the 0G, but I always struggled to kind of get a grip on where everything was within the space station. So there was game sessions where I was just lost. I had no clue where I was going, and there's nothing really, or maybe not, I had no clue, but I was stuck. I couldn't get around something. You're spending 20 minutes searching for some sort of switch, or maybe it's just not connecting with you. Sure. Those problems are still there, and those pop up more and more as you get towards that latter half. I think they expect you in the latter half of the game to go and search things more and do a lot of those side quests and kind of pad things out. Because I remember there being a big difficulty spike between that and the main quest.
Right, okay. Yeah, because the enemies just keep getting bigger and bigger, and they have a lot of range on them. So it's... But I've been going through like more completionist from the very beginning because I've enjoyed those micro stories. And I know I know to expect Arcane... just is not going to probably deliver that main narrative. That's not their bag. But man, I would love to see them do a Deus Ex type game, a cyberpunk game. They don't even need the license because Adam Jensen's not a great character.
Yeah, but it's important once again to note that Prey was originally a System Shock game. They just couldn't get the license. So this is, for all intents and purposes, this is System Shock 3.
There you go.
Just with that. So it is going to have those ups and downs. For me, I enjoyed it for the most part. But like you said, it's a flawed game. It's not perfect through and through. It's not this amazing sandbox. I think, You didn't like the newest Deus Ex as much. I think it's better than Prey, but for different reasons.
Oh, really? Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, because it offers the same things, but the thing is, with the new Deus Ex, there's so much more life, and there's a lot of it's more adult. I guess I would say in the terms of
the writing. I found was bad. It was sloppy.
You like the older Deus Ex, like I'll admit that too. The writing is not the greatest, but I enjoyed the setting. I would say more.
There's this. The whole thing with Mankind Divided is Deus Ex Mankind Divided, the most recent one. Mm-hmm. They're like, all right, we are going with Black Lives Matter, except AUGs.
Yeah.
And the way they approached it didn't make any sense, because for you to get all those AUGs, you would have to be rich. But the AUGs are treated poorly, and then they're poor. So you go to these slums, and you realize, why are all you poor? It's in the older Deus Exes, what they would do is they would withhold cures for diseases, and these people would be poor and they'd be in pain and they'd be sick, and it made a lot more sense. But I find all the stuff was just like slammed together in Mankind Divided and felt so sloppy. The actual gameplay was really good though.
That's the thing for me. Mankind Divided, I just kind of glossed over the finer aspects and just enjoyed the idea of I can play how I want to play, and I was pleasantly surprised because I'm not a person who really enjoys games like Deus Ex or even like Prey. I kind of like to be told, here's how you should approach it. Use your skills, not hey, figure this out. Because oftentimes than not, I would rather just take the run and gun approach than anything else.
You can't really run and gun for quite a long time in Prey.
Or even Deus Ex. But I felt that Deus Ex, often there was maybe a bigger consequence to messing up. I don't know. For whatever reason, I just liked the setting more. It's been a while since I played Mankind Divided, but they're similar in the way they play. But you were completely correct. The story in Mankind Divided is something I don't really mind. I don't really care about. Whereas in Prey, that's what grabs you immediately. Is the setup,
Oh, there's a lot of setup, and then
it's a really good opening sequence.
Oh my God, one of the best ever. Jeremy B is in the chat. Hey, Jeremy B. All right, let's move on to Immortal Redneck, and then we'll call it a night.
Yeah, this one's gonna be a quick one, guys. I'll throw out some names of some games, and we'll see if do you know Rogue Legacy, Matt?
Yeah.
PC game. Okay. Binding of Isaac.
Yes.
Okay, these are roguelikes. Yes, these are roguelikes.
Yes.
So what Immortal Redneck is, it's a roguelike, like Rogue Legacy, but it's a first-person shooter. For those who don't know what roguelikes are, essentially, it's a game that is going to be repeated. You do it in runs. You're going to approach whatever the challenge is, and you're going to play through and play the game until you die. And then when you die, whatever resources you gained on that run, you will spend to upgrade your overall character and then go back in stronger than ever. The reason I bring up Rogue Legacy is because it's very similar to that. Immortal Redneck is you play as an Immortal Redneck. He is a mummy who is also a redneck, and you are in this kind of, this desert area, and there's 3 big pyramids. All right. You can only access one pyramid at a time. And, you beat the first pyramid, then go on to the second and the third or whatever. So you can only do one at a time. But each pyramid is generally the same. There's 7 floors, and each floor is procedurally generated. So you'll run around and you'll be discovering the map. As you enter a new room, sometimes it's a challenge room. So do some first-person platforming and get to a chest. Most times it's kill all the enemies in the room, right? Mm-hmm. You kill the enemies, they drop gold, they may drop some power-ups or something like that, whatever. Eventually, you'll find a room that takes you to the next floor. And you proceed like that. As you get higher up in the pyramid, enemies get more difficult, but they give better rewards. Halfway through the pyramid, there's a boss. And at the very end of the pyramid, there is a final boss. Once you beat that final boss, you can move on to the next. But like I said, this is a roguelike. So it's hard to expect that you would beat this game with anything less than dying 200, 300 times, For really good players, maybe like 50 times. But the whole point of this game is to go in, kill a bunch of stuff, get a bunch of gold, and eventually it's just going to be too hard because your guy doesn't do enough damage. You don't have enough health. You don't have enough defense, enough critical damage. So you'll die, and then you'll respawn, and then you go over to the skill tree. And the skill tree has nodes, and for 10 gold, you can upgrade and do 1 more damage. For 40 gold, you have this much more defense, more critical damage, more critical chance, etc., etc. You spend your gold, and then you go back in. And that's really the gameplay loop. The things that Immortal Redneck does that I like from a first-person perspective is it's insanely fast. Matt, you played Doom, the newer Doom 2016, right?
Yes.
Okay, it's about 2 times faster than that. So imagine like breakneck speed of Quake 3. To that point, you also unlock what they call favors. It's just different characters, but they didn't want to voice anything more than the Immortal Redneck. So you do get different characters that have different loadouts. So like the Immortal Redneck has a revolver, an Uzi, and dynamite. One of the guys I played as a lot, his name was Lord Apis, or Apis, the Lord of Strength. He has a grenade launcher, an Uzi, a machine gun, a sniper kind of thing, and he has a different active ability than the Immortal Redneck does. Eventually, you can unlock up to like 9 different characters, and they all represent a different playstyle. You know, one might get more gold, one is really fast, one's kind of a stealthy character, and they all play relatively different. They have their pros and cons, and you want to use different ones for different pyramids. And oftentimes in roguelikes, I feel like it's more of a numbers battle. It's just all about getting all that gold and upgrading your stats as much as possible. But in Immortal Redneck, the character you play as often dictates the amount of success you'll have, because the enemy types are vastly different as you go from pyramid to pyramid. The themes of the pyramids are vastly different. So this is a roguelike that is constantly giving you more content. And I brought up Binding of Isaac because Binding of Isaac does that too. As you progress, you'll unlock new items, new guns, new weapons as you get further in the game that are more powerful. But it's really that basic. You know, if you're a fan of twitchy shooters, if you like first-person platforming, that actually works pretty damn well, because every character except for the super strong one has a double jump and eventually a triple jump. It's going to be right up your alley. This is a game where you go in, you play for 20 minutes, unless you're having an amazing run, like I've had a few times. You beat a whole pyramid in one go. You just play it, you shoot some guys really fast, you have a good time, and then you spend your gold and maybe come back another day. Try out a new character or two. You just fiddle around with it. But it is a roguelike based in very twitchy, fast-paced first-person shooting. That's like the sell of it. There's really not much more to it. I mean, unless you have anything specific to ask about.
All right, I played a game called Strafe, which I didn't really like, but I hear it has improved a lot over launch, and it was a procedurally generated 1996-ish. It maybe a little older. It was looking for that late 90s, mid-late 90s polygonal, pixely 3D shooter.
Yeah, this goes for a slightly more cartoony.
Right. But my whole point was not the style, was more of the procedurally generated. I thought that game really suffered because it was procedurally generated, because it didn't have good enough level design, because it was so random, where everything felt very generic and bland. So does the procedurally generated part hurt or help this game in a way? Like, does it set up?
So it might be a choice of words. There's definitely a difference between procedurally generated and randomized and stuff.
Yeah.
Here's what I realized. As I was playing the first pyramid took me about 6 hours to overcome. By the time I had reached that last level, I knew every room type that they were going to drop on me. It's not so much like, okay, we're generating this room. It's going to have 4 walls, 2 windows, and 3 doors going out. It's more like they have a set of 60 rooms, and then every time you enter the pyramid, they're going to assemble those rooms in a different way, right? So by the time I reached the end of the first pyramid, I said I could peek my head into a room and go, oh, I know what this is. And oftentimes these rooms can be multi-leveled. They can feel like areas within themselves. So they're not as much procedurally generated as they are made and then just chosen at random and assembled on a map differently every time. But when I reached the end of that pyramid, I knew all the layouts of the levels. I knew all of the enemies and kind of where they were going to spawn for the most part. And I said, if all of these levels, or if all of these rooms are the same for the pyramid, it's not enough content. But then when I went into the second pyramid, all of the room designs are different. There's a few that carried over, but the majority of them were brand new. The majority of enemies were brand new, and it was a completely different thematic style. So by the time you're going to and your mileage may vary. It took me 6 hours, could take you 10, could take you 3. But by the time you finish one pyramid, you'll have a general familiarity with it. And when you move on to that next one, it's all going to be brand new. So I never felt that because by the time I was getting sick of seeing the same room, that's when I got to the next area. And maybe I was just lucky with that. But that's the benefit of Immortal Redneck. Each pyramid is maybe a collection of 60 to 100 rooms that are randomly organized on each floor versus they're just trying to make up rooms as you go. And it is hard to kind of figure out if you don't know a bunch about procedurally generated versus randomly generated, but there is a big difference. I think Strafe makes the rooms as you go, right? Is that what it kind of, they're kind of bare bones, yeah?
They generally just end up being, rooms, corridors, and then they flood you with more like a Serious Sam style amount of enemies, like dozens and dozens and dozens of enemies.
There is a lot of that too. In this game, there is a lot of enemies. There's a big variety of enemies, and that's what I'll say. The actual art design, the character design is great. There's so much imagination. It's not a game that's very bloody. It's not very serious. These are cartoony characters. If you're running the trailer, you can see some of these characters and some of these enemies. They are cartoony. The game is not violent. The only reason this game is mature is because the redneck himself spouts off stereotypical Southern things like F the government and I don't want to pay my taxes. And sometimes he's a womanizer. He'll talk about how hot some of the goddesses are. And it's really only the one-liners and the vulgarity of his one-liners that earns this game an M rating. I think it might even be teen and they just passed the F-bombs underneath their noses of the SRB. But what I was surprised about is this game is a good first-person shooter for kids or teens who can handle that fast-paced because there's no gore, there's no blood, there's no sex. It's really just that vulgarity. So it was weird to have that. But the art design, the room design, the character and enemy design, it's really well done. The visuals themselves, the textures can be okay. It can have kind of this blurry Unity kind of look. You know what I'm talking about, but other people might not.
It looks like a poor man's Overwatch.
Like yes, exactly, like a poor man's Overwatch. But the art design is so evocative of the themes of the pyramid and what they're trying to go for that I had no problem with it. It's a very cool game to look at.
They go for a lot of bigger, almost like an N64 style of big flat textures, or like Overwatch. It seems pretty smart to work within the budget that way.
And also what that does is you can identify those enemies from very far away because
that's smart.
Like I can tell you, the guy who he raises a staff and shoots out a bunch of purple orbs. He is really annoying, but I know not to go towards him because he's a big purple dude and you can see him from across the map. There's it's easy to identify enemies. It's easy to do all that kind of stuff. And I think that's where this game succeeds the most. It's generally a replayable game just because it's a roguelike. So I had no problem returning time and time again. And the one thing I'll say to it, and Matt, you know how many games I play, and you know specifically when you're reviewing a game, and if you review a game and you play a bunch of hours, you might be done immediately, right? When I beat this game, I beat the final pyramid, I was at 17 hours. Immediately spent my gold and went back in and played again.
Hey,
I was just like, let's try. I beat the last pyramid, and then I was like, hey, I'm going to go into the first pyramid and wipe that whole thing with my fully upgraded dudes. And it was awesome to do. So just based upon that, if you're a fan of very good and tight controls, like with first-person shooters, it can feel a little bit weird. The controls are awesome. The amount of auto aim they give you or aim assist, it really makes it a fun game. Everybody, when you talk about twitchy shooters, you always think of those kids on CSGO or Counter-Strike who are doing really fast snipes and stuff like that. The snipers in this game have so much aim assist that you can just 180 no-scope people like it's nothing. It's all about being fast, shooting things quickly, jumping around, jumping over enemies. It's a lot of movement that you don't really see in modern shooters. Stuff that you would expect in, like I said, Quake 3 Arena or some of these competitive shooters. But just the amount of imagination in the art, how fun the shooting actually was, and how much I was tied to this game. I was going between a 9 and an 8.5, but it brings it down more towards an 8 for me, an 8.5-ish kind of thing, because the vulgarity from the Immortal Redneck, it's not funny. I chuckled like once, and it kind of bars entry for a lot of younger gamers. Like if I had a 10-year-old kid, I probably wouldn't let him play the game because they say the F word so much for no reason. But if that wasn't in there, I would completely let him play it because there's no other objectionable content. If this game didn't have the swearing in it, it could be rated E10 plus. Well, there's guns, so it'd be teen, but you know, it's just this weird decision. It's like somebody made this really awesome game that is not for audiences, and then the writer was just like, I'm gonna write a bunch of dick jokes and stuff. It's like, you don't. Same thing with Rad Rogers. It kind of is this juxtaposition. That's why I want to bring it up. But as far as gameplay goes, it's a blast. I haven't had this much fun with a roguelike since Binding of Isaac. It's really good. It's very simplistic. So if you're put off about the idea of a roguelike, if it doesn't make that much sense to you, it's very easy to parse, and there's not too much going on. It's one of those gameplay. It's one of those games that's easy to learn, kind of tough to master, but always fun because you're always making progression, for sure. I don't know if you have any questions because it's like it is really that basic, but I don't know what else
I think you covered it all there. I was just gonna say big update for the channel. Jeremy B, one of our longtime patrons, just sent me the code so we can add the Royal Edition DLC to our Final Fantasy 15 playthrough. He just sent that over right now, so thanks very much.
Dude, Final Fantasy 15. Are you playing that new Gold Edition? I saw they had a new
Royal Edition's the new deal.
Okay, yeah.
But I have the vanilla copy, and Jeremy felt so strongly that we needed to add in this Royal DLC content into our playthrough, so he just sponsored that. So thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff they change. Shouts out, Jeremy. I played Final Fantasy 15. I think I made to chapter 8, and then people told me to hold off because chapter 13 was really bad at that point. And I heard something about like it was either too long or some silly kind of end game thing. So I waited, and then eventually they said, "Oh, they're going to release this thing where you can drive the car off the road and stuff." And I kept waiting for that. And then eventually,
you can do that in this version that I have, but I think I have that was included in a patch. You didn't have to pay for it.
I stopped playing before that, and then you know how it is once you put 30 hours into a game, if you walk away for 3 months, it's going to be kind of hard to go back, especially with a Final Fantasy game and being about halfway through the story. So I fell off on that. But as far as Final Fantasy games go, I like 15 quite a bit. Maybe it's just because it's more action-oriented. It's kind of that Kingdom Heartsy. Yeah, it's really fun.
Such a good vibe. It's got such good storytelling.
I like the characters a lot, too.
The characters are fantastic. The pacing is done really, really well. What I love about it is that many JRPGs saddle you with the main objective, like, you gotta save the world, man! But along the way, you can just hang out and, like, train chocobos, which makes no sense. Whereas this one, your mission is, you gotta go see this girl you're gonna marry, but she has a job and she's not gonna give that up. And then your car breaks down.
That big backstory is there. It's just not immediately thrown on the player.
And I love the lore of Final Fantasy games, but I love it more when they focus on how does that lore affect the characters personally, rather than just like lore.
I think that's why I like 15 so much. It's because before you have to worry about the end of the world and all these big conspiracies, you have become somewhat attached to this ragtag group of boy band looking guys because you watched them in their first hours running through the desert and, fixing up their car. And you've had a few hours with them on a personal level before you get into all the crazy stuff.
And
I like that a lot.
And because it's like in an open world game, you spend a lot of time, and this one especially, walking back and forth to the different objectives. So they do a great job of ambiently telling you the story with little quips. They're just talking to each other while you're dusting off a few like monsters that you run into, and you're dealing with some of these side quests and moving around. Like Metal Gear Solid 5 did the same thing, where you spend a lot of time moving around the map. So they give you all the conversations on a little tape player, so you can do it simultaneously. It's just like good story.
I forgot about it, but one of my favorite things of that game, Final Fantasy 15, is that Pronto always takes those pictures, and when you rest for the night and go talk to Pronto, sometimes he'll show you them, and you'll talk about. I really like the characters. I think that even though you could say that many of them are kind of tropey for Final Fantasy, each character truly feels like a fleshed out character. They don't feel like a trope, even though they might look like it. Noctis kind of looks like your standard pro tag kind of emo kid, but he has some stuff going on. Pronto kind of looks like that wimpy hope kind of wah, but Pronto has shit going on too. I really like the characters they pulled for this. And I like the whole kind of aesthetic of it, the whole road trip kind of thing they got going on.
Yeah, I'm really surprised with it. I'd only sort of dabbled with it while I was in the middle of 13, and I just didn't really I couldn't get into it.
You gotta put all of your stuff into it.
Exactly.
You really gotta play that.
Yeah. I'm loving it. It's just, I love that Square Enix has one of the most successful franchises of all time, and they make it successful by not rebooting, not remaking. Well, I mean, other than what they're doing with 7 and the other games. Yeah, every new one is like, brand new stuff. We got brand new stuff here for you. We've had 10 years to think about it. And they just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. The hilarious
15 had so much. 15 had so much production. It was originally what, Versus 13 or whatever. Like there's so much.
Yeah, a portion of that is in there. The funny thing for me is that you have these very realistic looking characters. Basically, their take on an Ubisoft game. These like American looking people with hats, and then all of a sudden,
guy who wants you to take the pictures and everything.
Yeah,
it's perfect.
And then these like spiky haired people like, hey, we're from anime. What's going on? And then all of a sudden you have this realistic, you're at a truck stop, but somebody will say something that sounds directly out of a 1987 RPG. They go, oh, go northwest and there's a magical tomb you should go check out. But it all fits.
13 magical. I forgot about the magical tombs. See, that's where I'm at. Like, I'm right there. Oh, boy.
Wonderful game.
So many things.
And now we've got even more thanks to Jeremy. But that's going to do it for today. So, Immortal Redneck sounds like a hearty recommend. Rad Rogers, only if you're really, really into it. Oh, Rosner just showed up. YOLO. Another one of our fantastic patrons.
What you missed was we talked about Immortal Redneck, and we talked about Rad Rogers, and some Metal Gear and some Final Fantasy.
And some
Generally speaking, Prey too, yeah. Rad Rogers is like this. Immortal Redneck is good, but it's only Xbox and PC. I should mention that. Prey, we're like, whoa. And Metal Gear. Good stuff. That was the summary of the entire podcast and like me doing hand motions.
You could have saved us an hour. All right, we're out of here. So
every week.
Tomorrow we are back 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time with Final Fantasy 15, now with added Royal Edition content. And Matt, what's your Twitter, baby?
Ooh, at SGC64 Matt. I think it's like up there. Could be wrong.
It is. It's right above your head. So there's no.
If you tweet at me, you can tweet at me, and I'll say something witty.
Yeah, Matt really likes Twitter. He thinks it's really important.
I'm a fan.
I'm not. I look at it for the news. I look at it in case Donald Trump has issued like World War final,
because that is official or not anymore.
I have I just like, even though I hate reading what he has to say, I want to know when he pisses somebody off bad enough that it's over for us. And what else? Some video game. Oh, it's a great Twitter follow. Cheap Ass Gamer and
Wario64 at Wario64.
Oh man, that's the best reason to have Twitter.
If you're a gamer and you're on Twitter and you don't follow at Wario64, you're really messing up. They just, that whole Twitter account, all they do is post when things are like mispriced online or super super cheap. So it'll be like, hey, Final Fantasy 15 is actually priced at $10 on this eBay or this Amazon, and you just boom. That's really good. Really good.
But it could also be
tons of other stuff.
It could also hurt when you like. I just bought Prey for $50, and then the next 2 days, Cheap Ass Gamer's like, here you go, it's for 25 or 20.
Yeah,
but
your mileage may vary.
Absolutely. All right, we're out of here. I'll see you tomorrow morning. Thank you, Jeremy, so much for the Royal Edition. Thank you, Rosner, for all your support and for popping in. Dark Horse and everybody else that watched on Twitch, Facebook, and YouTube. We will see you later. Bye for now.